Good morning, students. Today we are going to start a new topic of world history, the Great Depression in USA, Germany, Britain, France and Japan, which took place in 1929. Before we start our topic, let's discuss broadly the objectives of the topic. The objectives of the topic are the Great Boom and Crash in USA after the First World War, the reign of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, impact of Great Depression on Germany, impact of Great Depression on Japan, what was the impact of Great Depression in Britain, the Great Depression in France. And in today's module, we will discuss the Great Depression in USA. We will be discussing the Great Boom and Crash after the First World War in USA and the reign of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So let us start with our topic of the module. We will be discussing in this module how USA emerged as superpower after the First World War, how the economy of USA prospered after the First World War, but then in 1929 how economic depression hit America, and finally we will discuss that how President Franklin D. Roosevelt helped American economy to recover from economic depression and make America a strong country. Let's discuss the new words of the topic. The first word is economic depression. A depression is a severe and prolonged downturn in economic activity. When the economy is going through a bad phase for a longer period of time, in economics it is called as economic depression. In economics, a depression is commonly defined as an extreme recession. Recession means slowdown of economic activity, and if the recession is for a longer period of time, at least for 3 years or more, then it is called as economic depression. If the economic activities are slow for at least 3 years, or it leads to decline in GDP of 10%. Now students, GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It means the number of goods and services produced in one country. Suppose if the goods and services produced in one country is showing 10% decline as compared to the previous years, it shows that the country is going through the phase of economic depression. The next term is stock exchange. Stock exchange acts as a market where stock buyers connect with stock sellers. Stocks can be traded on one or more of several exchanges, such as New York Stock Exchange or NYSE or the NASDAQ, which is the National Stock Exchange of America. So stock exchange acts as a market where individual investors and big institutional investors come together to buy and sell the shares of different institutions. The next term is Tennessee Valley Authority. It was a corporation financed by the government of America which built dams across rivers to promote irrigation supply, electricity and prevent flood. Basically, this was built by the government of America in order to give employment to the poor Americans so that the economy of America could recover. The next is Social Security Act. According to this act, the Americans without children, orphans and handicaps were provided state subsidy for their survival. The act was passed in 1935 to protect the interest of the poor class of USA. This act was a great support for those children who were not having their parents and those who were physically and mentally handicapped. The government provided them economic and social security and declared that it was the work of the government to protect its citizens. Moratorium, a temporary prohibition of an activity. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It was a law that implemented protectionist trade policies in the United States. Sponsored by Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis C. Hawley, it was signed by President Herbert. The main purpose of this act was to impose high taxes on the goods which were imported to America so that the domestic industry could flourish. Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl was the name given to the drought-stricken southern plain region of United States, which suffered severe dust storms due to dry period in 1930s. As high winds and choking dust swept the region from Texas to Nebraska, people and livestock were killed and crops failed across the entire region. And this also became one of the strong reasons for economic depression in America, as the people were not having anything to eat because their crops were failed. They put a heavy pressure on the economy of America. The next word is capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. USA had always favored privatization, so capitalism was another name of privatization, where everything was controlled by the private individual and done for earning profit, and state usually doesn't interfere in the economic activities. The next is the laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is an economic system in which transactions between private parties are absent of any form of economic interventionism, such as regulation and subsidies. That means government doesn't control the economic activities. Government even doesn't put any type of restrictions such as import duty or export duty, custom duties. All these taxes are exempted because private individuals are given freedom to operate freely. Emergency Banking Act. It means law passed by the American Congress or legislature on March 9, 1933. 3 days later, FDR declared a nationwide bank holiday combined with the Federal Reserve's commitment to supply unlimited amounts of currency to reopen banks created 100% deposit insurance. As failure of the banks were the main reason of economic depression of America in 1929. So FDR, or Franklin T. Roosevelt, their president of that time, declared a law passed by the American Congress, Emergency Banking Act, and also declared 3 days nationwide holidays to the banks so that the banks can be equipped with sufficient amount of liquid or money in order to create confidence of the people in the banking system of America. Money supply. The total amount of money in circulation or in existence in country is called as the money supply. And usually the money is supplied by the main bank of the country. In case of America, it was the Federal Reserve Bank which controlled the supply of money in the country. The next term is recession. A recession is a business cycle contraction where there is a general decline in economic activity, or we can say there is a drastic decrease in the investment by the people in the share market. Now let's start with the first topic of today's module, the boom in the American economy, which started in 1920 and lasted till 1929. Let's discuss what was the condition of American economy during the First World War. When war broke out in Europe in the summer of 1914, a sense of dread rippled through the American business community. So great was the fear of contagion from the trembling European markets that New York Stock Exchange was closed for more than 3 months, the longest suspension of trade in its history. No doubt America was not the part of the First World War. Yet its economy was affected by the European economy because it was doing trade with the European countries, especially with England and France. So when a world war was started in 1914, it also affected the American economy, as the New York Stock Exchange was closed for more than 3 months because the investors were not having the confidence in the share market. At the same time, businesses could see the enormous potential the war might bring to their bottom lines. The economy was mired in the recession in 1914, and war quickly opened the new markets for American manufacturers. In the end, World War I set off a 44-month period of growth for the United States and solidified its power in the world economy. What seems in the beginning of the First World War that the economy of America would collapse due to the First World War in Europe actually proved a blessing to the American economy. The American business flourished, Especially the armament industry and the food industry flourished because they used to export these essential materials to the European countries. Amongst the main buyers of American products were French and the British. In the last stages of the World War I, the United States solidified its economy, and that was a 44-month period for America for growth. During the First World War, USA became financial banker of the world by selling war materials and food supplies to the belligerents of the World War. And amongst the main buyers were the Allied powers. The group of England, France, Russia were the main buyers of the American goods. America used to send the war materials, the weapons, and other essential materials to these countries. In fact, America was opened to give financial assistance to any group, to any country on return of high rate of interest. Now let's understand the great boom in the economy of America after the Second World War. Let's discuss its background first. Let's discuss the political scenario of USA after the First World War. After the Germans signed the armistice, or they surrendered in November 1918, Wilson, who was the president of USA during the First World War, went to Paris to try to build enduring peace in the world so that a peace can be established in the entire world. He later presented to the Senate the Versailles Treaty. Senate is the upper house of the American Congress. He presented the Versailles Treaty in front of Senate, containing the Convent of League of Nations, where League of Nations formation was an important part, and asked, "Dare we reject it and break the heart of the world?" He wanted to convey this message to Senate that America should be a part of League of Nations. But the election of 1918 had shifted the balance from Congress to Republican. The Senate did not accept the proposal of Wilson that America should join League of Nations. So America kept itself aloof from League of Nations. And in 1918, the Republican candidates became more important in the politics of USA. The Versailles Treaty failed by 7 votes in Senate. So popularity of Wilson as a president also declined in America. Wilson, against the warning of his doctors, had made a national tour to mobilize public sentiment for the treaty. Exhausted, he suffered a stroke and nearly died. Tenderly nursed by his second wife, Edith Bolingbroke, he lived until 1924, and in 1924 he died as a result of a heart attack. Wilson always wanted that America should join League of Nations. He suffered a stroke due to stress campaigning for League of Nations. He was an invalid for the remainder part of his term, and common public had no clue where Wilson has gone. After the death of Wilson, there was rise of Republican in USA. In America, there were 2 main political parties, the Republican and the Democratic. The Republican Party was more conservative than the Democratic Party. It believed in more traditional values. After the First World War, the importance of the Democratic Party, to which Wilson also belonged to, declined in America, as many of the senators were against the view of Wilson that America should be a part of League of Nations, and they were also against the Treaty of Versailles. Now let's discuss the policy of laissez-faire adopted by the Republican presidents. The Republican candidates Harding, Hoover, and Coolidge, all these 3 presidents adopted the policy of non-intervention or isolation, or in French we can say the policy of laissez-faire. It means government would not interfere in the private matters, it would not interfere in the economic activities, it would not impose any sort of tax, and it would also not give any type of protection to its local industries. That means the market operations will determine demand and supply, and also would determine the profit capability of the private investors. Now, what was that laissez-faire policy? The laissez-faire policy or capitalism is the policy of let them do as they choose. That means government is not going to interfere in any sort of economic activity. The other words for this can be the keep calm. It separated government and economy. Government was only related to politics and investors were only related to economics. This was a policy which was popularized by Adam Smith, who was also called as the father of economics. Let's understand the origin of this word. Laissez-faire is a French word in origin which means let people do as they please. The enlightened philosopher of French argued against government intervention in the economy and also the use of placing high tariffs on foreign goods. They were against that government regulations should be there and government should interfere in the economic activities of the investors. They were of view that if government followed free trade or non-intervention of the government, the economy would grow at a more rate and the economy would also prosper. Due to the policy of laissez-faire and World War I as being a blessing for America, the 1920 period was a period of great boom for the American economy. Let's discuss some other reasons which were responsible for great boom in the economy of America. Warren Harding was the first ever Republican president of USA. He became president in 1921 and stayed in office till 1923. He adopted the policy of protectionism. The President of USA promised to bring political and economic normalcy after the First World War. He promised to give more business to investors and put more money in the pockets of the ordinary American people. In 1922, he introduced the Fordney-McCumber Tariff Act, which imposed a tax on goods from foreign countries. This was his effort to decrease the prices of domestic products as compared to the foreign goods, so that the local people would buy the domestic products and indigenous local industries of America could be boosted. Because of this tax, the foreign goods became more expensive than the domestic products, and so this encouraged Americans to buy their local American goods only. After Harding, Calvin Coolidge became the president of USA. He was also a Republican president. Calvin Coolidge decided to focus more on domestic problems facing the United States, in contrast to Wilson's progressive agenda, which followed the government to regulate big businessmen. During Wilson's time, the government used to interfere in the economic activities of the investors and hence it was under the control of the government. Calvin decided to more give time on the political reforms and let the economy free. The new administration sought to empower businesses, decrease regulation, and cut taxes to enable business to grow and contribute more to domestic production. Calvin decided to reduce the taxes to boost the American economy and to encourage the investors to make investment in the American economy. He decided to provide more business facilities to the investors so that America can emerge as a strong financial power. During the campaign for his presidential election, Coolidge said, "Less government in business and more business in government." That means the government should focus on its own business, on political reforms, and let the economy free to operate by the natural forces of demand and supply of market. Business became a symbol of American prosperity, and in 1920s saw the United States come out of post-war recession with high economic growth. During Coolidge's time, industries flourished, the stock market rose, technology rapidly evolved in America. Calvin Coolidge gave a great confidence to the investors of America to invest in the share market. As a result, technology developed. America especially developed itself in the automobile industry, which became one of the reasons of great boom of America. Agricultural development was yet another reason for the great boom of 1920s. American farmers had experienced dramatic growth during the First World War, following a significant increase in demand stemming from their European counterparts. inability to keep up with agricultural demands while fighting the war, as the Allied powers, especially England, France, Russia group, which were the main buyers of American products. They were busy in the war and they were unable to supply the food crops required in their country. So they were more dependent on America for the agricultural products. And this gave boost to the agricultural development in America and also contributed to the GDP of America, and hence America became on the path of the booming economy of the world. Last but not the least, the factor which was responsible for American boom in 1920 was the progress in technology. Technological progress or progress in technology led to mass production of goods. The electrification of America, new mass marketing techniques adopted by the Republican presidents, the availability of cheap credit given by the American Federal Reserve, and increased level of employment by the government created a huge amount of consumers in the market, which led to more spending by the people on the consumer products and hence raised the GDP or gross domestic product of America, which indirectly is a signal of the wealth of an economy. GDP, I have made it clear in the new words also, stands for the total amount of goods and services produced in one country. If the government would provide confidence to the investors, naturally the number of goods and services would be more in the market. The Republican presidents created a sense of confidence in the investors, which raised the GDP of America and hence contributed to boom in American economy in 1920. After a period of boom in the economy of 1920 to 1929, suddenly in 1929, America was hit by the Great Depression. Let us discuss the second topic of this module, the Great Depression in America in 1929. The Great Depression of America of 1929. The Great Depression started in the United States after a major fall in stock prices. It began around September 4, 1929 and became worldwide news with the stock market crash of October 29, 1929, known as the Black Tuesday in American history. The level of unemployment in US rose to 23%. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world, lasting from 1929 to 1939. By 1933, when the Great Depression reached its lowest point, some 15 million Americans were unemployed and nearly half of country's bankers had failed. So the Great Depression of 1929 of America was comprised by low employment level, the failure of the banking systems, and the failing of the stock market. One of the reasons of Great Depression in economy is always underconsumption by the people, when people don't think that they need more appliances, but on the contrary, the producers are producing more. There is overproduction on the supply side, and on the demand side there is less consumption. But in America's 1929 Great Depression, there were more causes also which were related to it. Now let's discuss the causes of the Great Depression of America in 1929. The first reason which was responsible for the Great Depression of America was the stock market crash of 1929. During the 1920s, the USA stock market underwent a historic expansion. As stock prices rose to unprecedented level, investing in stock market came to be seen as very easy way to make money. So everybody started investing in the share market. Even people of ordinary means, the people who were rarely earning their livelihood, they also invested in the share market. The people used to invest even by small amount of saving, and sometimes they even used to take loan on mortgage of their houses in order to buy the stocks of the share market. Such was the confidence level of the ordinary people in the share market of America. But suddenly on 29th October, Tuesday, and 31st October, Thursday, something went wrong. It was called as the Black Day, the Black Tuesday and Black Thursday in the history of America. The Wall Street crashed and America's economic system suddenly collapsed. The Americans were having great trust on stock market of America. So by the end of the decade, hundreds of millions of shares were being carried on margin. They were purchased on margin. On margin means that they were not showing any profit. Still, investors prefer to buy it, hoping that they would generate profit out of those shares in future. It means that their purchase price was financed with loans to be repaid with profits generated from ever-increasing share price. People used to take loan in order to buy the shares of the market, hoping that they would pay off their loan from the profit that the shares would generate to them. Once prices began their inevitable decline in October 1929, millions of extended shareholders fell into panic and rushed to liquidate their holdings. When suddenly the shares of the prices fell down dramatically in October 1929, the shareholders wanted to sell off their shares in order to get the money so that they could pay off their loans. The second reason for economic depression in America was the bank failures. Nearly 7,000 banks failed in the waning month of 1929 and more than 3,000 collapsed in 1930. Federal Deposit Insurance was not yet set up. Federal Deposit Insurance is the highest bank of America, and at that time it was not yet set up. So when the banks failed, people lost all their money. Some people panicked and desperately withdrew their money, which in turn forced more banks to collapse. As share market collapsed, the banks was naturally to be collapsed. Out of fear, people wanted to take away their money which they have deposited in the banks. So banks were literally not having any funds. By the end of the decade, that is 1930, more than 9,000 banks had failed. This caused the money supply to shrink and economy to contract. As the banks had been failure, so circulation of money in the economy was stopped. This caused a contraction or depression in form of great contraction in the economy. It led to significant decline in aggregate investment as people were not having money, so there was lack of investment in the economy. The decreased money supply further aggravated price deflation, putting more pressure on already struggling businesses. So a vicious circle has started in American economy. Failure of the stock markets led to the failure of the banks. Failure of the banks meant that money supply in the market was less. As money supply in the market was less, so people were not having any money to invest, which raised the prices of the necessary commodities. As the prices raised, the demand became low and business became to struggle. There was total collapse of banking system in America. Nearly 9,000 banks failed during 1930s. The third reason for the economic depression of America in 1929 was American economic policy with Europe. Owing to protect US industry from overseas competitions, the Congress passed the Tariff Act of 1930, which was better known as the Smoot-Hawley measure. It imposed near a record tax rates a wide range of imported goods. The main motive of this tax was to decrease the prices of the local American products in comparison to the foreign goods, so that the Americans would buy the American products only, and it would help in the American economy to grow. The number of American trading partners retaliated by imposing tariff on US-made goods. There were many US investors who were the trading partners, who were having their business partners in other parts of the country. They protested this measure of the American government. As a result, world trade fell by 2/3 between 1929 and 1934. Yet another reason for economic depression was the drought conditions of America. A year-long drought coupled with farming practices which did not use soil conservation techniques created a vast region from southeast Colorado to the Texas panhandle that came to be known as Dust Bowl. Massive dust storms choked town, killing crops and livestock, sickening people, and caused untold millions in damage. Thousands fled to the region as the economy collapsed. The southeast region of America, from Colorado to Texas, experienced massive dust storms called as the Dust Bowls. These dust bowls killed the living organism, spoiled many crops, and even led to the lung diseases among the people. These people became dependent entirely on the American government. The government was not in condition to support these people as the Wall Street had already crashed. So these people who had put pressure on the economy of America became a more reason for the economic depression of America. On your screen, you can see the massive dust storm which the southeast region of America experienced in 1930s, which led to damage of crops, living organisms, and also damaged the health of the common people. Now let's discuss what were the effects of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was characterized by high consumer debt, over-optimistic loans by banks and investors, where they were knowing that the loans would not be recovered, the lack of high-growth new industries. These all three factors integrated, they joined together, and this caused the money supply to shrink. The supply of money, which is usually done by the banks of the country, slowed down as the banks were also failed. It resulted into great contraction of the economy and further resulted into the amount of investment. The amount of investment almost became negligible in America due to less money supply in the market. Another result of Great Depression was that the industries that suffered the most included construction, shipping, mining, logging, and agriculture due to the dust bowl conditions. Dust bowl, we had already discussed the dusty massive storms which were there in the southeast region of America. There was no employment there and people were suffering. All the occupations were not possible in that particular area. So, due to the condition of dust bowl, the industries which included shipping, mine, and construction collapsed in America. It also hit the manufacturing of the durable goods like automobiles, appliances, whose purchase consumers could postpone. As people were not having money, so the luxury goods industry suffered a lot, as people were having the option to delay the purchase of these commodities. Another effect of Great Depression was that economy hit bottom in the winter of 1932-33. Then came 4 years of growth until recession of 1937-38 brought back high level of unemployment. As government did not adopt a stable political policy, so unemployment level raised in the economy. People were not having jobs and they were standing outside the government offices in order to fetch any job. On your screen, you can see the pictures related to 1929 Great Depression, where jobless men were standing outside the government offices so that they could be provided any job. The people were totally dependent on the government for their livelihood. The next effect of Great Depression was the Great Depression affected politics by shaking its confidence in capitalism. Capitalism is a policy by which government doesn't interfere in the economic activities. Another policy which America had always been adopting was the policy of laissez-faire. The laissez-faire policy that President Herbert Hoover advocated. Herbert Hoover was president of Republican Party, failed miserably. Both the president and the policy failed miserably. As a result, people voted for Franklin D. Roosevelt. The unemployment level was rising in the country. but government had adopted the policy of laissez-faire. That means government would not interfere in the economic activities of the people. It resulted badly for the economic activities of people. The people were not satisfied with the activities of the government regarding negligence to the economic condition of the people. So it resulted into downfall of the Republican and again the rise of the Democratic Party and the rise of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the political sphere of America. Now let's discuss the last topic of today's module, the reign of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the American president of Democratic Party. He was the person who helped American economy to recover from the Great Depression by his new concept of New Deal. Let us discuss about this great president and his policies which helped America to grow again and became one of the superpowers of the world. Early life of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt was born in Hyde Park, New York on January 30, 1882. He was the son of James Roosevelt and Sarah Delano Roosevelt. His parents and private tutors provided him with almost all the formative education. He attended Groton, 1896 to 1900, a prestigious preparatory school in Massachusetts, and received a BA degree in history from Harvard in only 3 years. Roosevelt next studied law at New York's Columbia University. When he passed the bar examination, that is examination for judges, in 1907, he left school without taking a degree. For the next 3 years, he participated law with a prominent New York City law firm. He entered politics in 1910 and was elected to New York State Senator. Senate is upper house of American Congress. As a Democrat from traditionally Republican home district. It was an area where the Republicans were in great hold, but being a Democratic also, he got victory over this place. Now let's discuss FDR as president. Faced with Great Depression and World War I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, nicknamed FDR, guided America through its toughest domestic crisis, that is economic depression. FDR took office with the country mired in horrible and debilitating economic depression, as already economic depression has started in America, and it not only lost its material wealth and spiritual strength but cast a pall over its future. The country was in such a condition that not only at that time its economy was poor, but it was looking like that country would collapse in the coming years. Its future was seen as black because the resources were not available, the people were jobless, and they were putting blame on the government of not giving them jobs. Roosevelt's combination of confidence, optimism, and political vision, all of which came together in the experimental economic and social program of New Deal, helped bring about the beginning of national recovery. The time when everything was seen black for America, when there was no hope for America, this person, Franklin D. Roosevelt, came up with new strategy called New Deal, helping American economy to recover and again solidifying its economic strength. The New Deal was a series of programs, public works projects, financial reforms, and regulations enacted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United States between 1933 and 1939. It responded to the needs for relief, reform, and recovery from the Great Depression. The New Deal was basically a program by which the President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to give employment to the poor Americans by setting up many public work projects like setting up of bridges, building dams, building roads, and building infrastructure. He also provided many financial reforms and strengthening the banking system of America. These reforms were done from the period 1933 to 39, and it was based on 3 R's: relief, reform, and recovery. Relief to the poor people by providing them employment, reform in the financial sector of America, and recovery finally by relief and reform, the recovery of economy from depression to boom again. Now let us understand what was his concept of the New Deal. The New Deal programs were known as the 3R. Roosevelt believed that together relief, reform and recovery could bring economic stability to the nation. Here relief means helping the common people, the poor people of America, by providing them social security, jobs and financial assistance in case of unemployment. Reform means to help the economic structure to improve, to help the banking sector to reform, and to provide more money in the market so that people's confidence in the banking system can be developed. And by relief and reform, his target was to recover the economy of America from depression to the situation of boom again, where the share market should flourish and people once again show their interest in the stock exchange market of America. On your screen, you can see the 3 R's of the New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform, which became the basis of the New Deal. With the help of these 3 R's, American economy once again developed, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to get the economy of America through the bad phases of Great Depression to once again becoming a financial strong power in the world. On March 4, 1933, during the bleakest days of Great Depression, newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his first inaugural address before 1 lakh people in Washington's Capitol Plaza. He said, "First of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." He asked the American people not to be afraid of the economic condition of America and just trust on the president that he would bring some reforms in America. He asked the American to be confident and help in strengthening and rebuilding America on the principles of the New Deal. He asked, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." We have to get away from the fear that we cannot develop, and we cannot get away from the depression. The implementation of New Deal. Roosevelt declared a 4-day bank holiday to stop people from withdrawing their money from shaky banks. People were not having any trust on the banks, so they wanted to take away their money from the banks. But in order to develop an economy, the money supply in the market should be there, and money supply always depend upon the banking system. So he declared 4-day holiday so nobody could take out the money from the banks. On March 9, Congress, the legislature of America, passed Roosevelt's Emergency Banking Act, which reorganized the banks and closed the ones which were insolvent or which were not able to pay the loans which it had taken from the Federal Reserves. The second step towards the New Deal was the first 100 days. Roosevelt kicked things off by asking Congress to take the first step towards ending prohibition, one of the more divisive issues of 1920s, by making it legal once again for Americans to buy beer. At the end of the year, Congress ratified or passed the 21st Amendment and ended prohibition for beer. And why it was done? It was done to increase the sale of the beer, which would bring money into the government. As the money would come to the government, it would raise the level of the flow, the money circulation in the economy, which would start the New Deal at a good rate. The next step was, in May, he signed the Tennessee Valley Authority Act into law, which enabled the federal government to build dams along the Tennessee River that controlled flooding and generated inexpensive hydroelectric power for people in the region. The main motive of the Tennessee Valley Authority Act was to give employment also to the local people and making electricity cheaper so that people don't have to pay more for the electricity. Construction of dam means that the local people have to be involved, which would provide them employment. Congress passed a bill that paid commodity farmers. Commodity farmers means farmers who produce things like wheat, dairy products, tobacco and corn, to leave their fields fallow in order to end agricultural surpluses and boost prices. As agriculture production was in surplus and farmers were not getting their enough due for selling their crops, so the American Congress passed a law which said that the farmers should leave their farms so that the issue of surplus production can be checked. When demands for the food crop would raise in the market, automatically the farmers would get their due and they would be paid off sufficiently what they are required of. Then next, in June's National Industrial Recovery Act, President guaranteed that workers would have the right to make unions and bargain collectively for higher wages and better working conditions. By passing National Industrial Recovery Act in June, President Franklin D. Roosevelt guaranteed workers that they would have right to make their unions and ask more wages from the mill owners. They could also ask for better working conditions from the capitalists and thus secured the social security of the labor class. To sum up, the New Deal consisted of the Federal Works Program, which were aimed to give employment to the poor people, like building of roads and construction of dams, then environment improving programs like planting trees, social security to the women and the old parents, increase the rights of the labor by providing them right to make unions and asking for more money from the capitalist, and also gave farm assistance program to the farmers, asked the farmers to leave their lands for some time so that the demand for the food crops in the markets could be increased and the farmers could get sufficient amount of money for selling their crops in return. So this was all about the New Deal of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And now we are going to discuss the opposition to his New Deal. The New Deal of Roosevelt faced serious opposition from conservatives, as the implementation of above legislation required federal interference. Federal interference means the interference of the government. Conservatives regarded it as a violation of the Constitution. When Roosevelt was re-elected in 1936, he naturally believed his massive victory indicated people's support to his policy. The common people were supporting the New Deal as they were getting employment and they could realize that the banking system has also developed only due to the New Deal. But the Conservative Party was strongly opposing the New Deal. Complaints were made before Supreme Court against increasing federal interference in state government. The conservative old judges cancelled the act passed by the federal legislature. New Deal was in deep water because the judges were rejecting the laws passed by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt complained that Supreme Court was acting as a policy-making body instead of acting as a judiciary. Franklin D. Roosevelt said the role of judiciary or the Supreme Court is only to act as the judicial organ, but it was acting as a legislature by rejecting the laws passed by the Federal Legislative Council on the pretext that it was against the Constitution of America. He brought many bills before the legislative empowering the president to replace judges who were over 70 years and were unable to appreciate the spirit of changing time. But the bill was opposed by many conservatives. President wanted to depose those judges who were conservative by nature and not ready to accept the new changes. But the bill was opposed by the Conservative Party. The complaints were made that the president was demanding too much power. Roosevelt appointed new judges with new outlook in the Supreme Court. The passing of the New Deal. After appointment of many new judges in the Supreme Court, many federal laws were approved by the new judges and the Supreme Court. By 1938, the New Deal was passed. the New Deal ended economic depression in America and reported prosperity. Poor Americans received social justice and better economic life. Americans got used to federal interference in their life. America became strong, secure, and united. By the efforts of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the New Deal was passed. The poor Americans got social justice in case of unemployment or any illness. Americans accepted the interference of the government in the personal lives of the individual in order to develop the individual. America became a much strong country as it was before the First World War. It became economically, socially, and politically more secure and more united country than before. In order to provide social security to the Americans, Social Security Board was set up in America. The Social Security Board acted as a mandate office creator old age insurance protection to the people who were weak and who were not with their children. In America, Social Security cards were issued so that the poor Americans can be benefited. Those who were jobless were provided jobs with the help of the Social Security. By Social Security Board, more security was provided to the American families than before. When an unsuited worker dies, leaving dependent children and a widow, both mother and the children receives monthly benefits in form of economic help by the American government until the child becomes the age of 18. And then at the age of 18, he was to be provided with a job by the American government. So, Franklin D. Roosevelt not only made America economically strong country, but he rebuilt America, a country which is economically, socially, as well as politically stronger than any other nation of the world. Students, in today's topic, we have covered these subtopics. We have started with the economy of America during the First World War, that how it was a rich economy and how America acted as a banker nation and helped American economy to grow. Then we have discussed the political scenario after the First World War. That we have discussed under this point that the importance of Democrat declined and Republican increased in America. We have discussed the death of Wilson, who was the president of USA during the First World War and responsible for the Treaty of Versailles, died due to a massive heart attack. Then we have discussed the period of Democrat presidents in America, Harding, Hoover, and Coolidge, the causes of the great boom in US economy in 1920, which included the policy of laissez-faire, capitalism, agricultural development, the technological development of USA, and acting of America as a banker nation during the First World War. We have discussed the reason of Great Depression in America, the crash of Wall Street or the failure of the stock exchange market of America, the failure of the banks, the continuous droughts in the Colorado and Texas region of America, the poor agricultural techniques of the American peasants. Then we have discussed the rise of Franklin D. Roosevelt or FDR on the political scenario of America, his new program, New Deal, which was created to promote more security and to provide more employment to the people and raise the confidence level of the people in the banking system of America. We have also discussed that how New Deal was criticized by the conservative judges, but then with the appointment of new judges in the Supreme Court by Franklin D. Roosevelt, finally the New Deal was passed in 1938 and American ordinary people, the poor people, became satisfied with the economic and social condition of the country, and once again America emerged as one of the strongest country of world. In this module we have covered these questions. What was the economic condition of America during the First World War? Which factors contributed for boom in the economy of America in 1920? How did the crash of Wall Street responsible for historic economic depression? Give the factors responsible for economic depression of 1929. Discuss the early life of the Franklin D. Roosevelt. And explain the programs of New Deal started by FDR or Franklin D. Roosevelt. If you want to explore more on the topic, you can see a YouTube link on your screen. You can search more about this topic by clicking on this YouTube link. I hope this session had been fruitful for you. With the help of this explanation and internet, you are advised to make the notes of the above topic. See you in next session. Have a nice day.